The problem with principles, our U.S. crisis and our UU hope. My last visit here was sandwiched between two holidays. I spoke 2 weeks ago to a Valentine's theme, if you will. And today, my sermon stems from a train of thought that hit me on President's Day, right after I was here last time. I thought hard and long about American democracy, but for some reason my heart has just not been in it for, let's say, the past 4 months. I was surprised to find my philosophical mind at work on this once again, probing the deep patterns and the larger meanings of this moment's longer history in American democracy. This is what struck me. But first, a little water. I really did feel struck. Like, it's like, whoa, why hadn't I seen it that way before? This is what struck me. America was founded on a divorce between cultural community and political states. The process of our politics, the principles on which they're based, were taken following Montesquieu and Locke in the European Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, but pretty much taken apart from any sense of the cultural community. In Europe, states were communities of people that had different forms of government through different periods in history, but this was to be a new government with a new purpose. It isn't only Europe. Indigenous peoples, as tribes, as nations, as confederations, had found deliberate ways to balance powers and to be very inclusive in the participation of almost everyone in different ways in a process of government. But this was something different. And what these founders did by drawing on principles was to take that spirit of the Age of Reason and to condense that into what were promised as absolute rights. The Declaration of Independence did not need a section on self-evident truths. To declare independence from Britain, to establish an independent nation, could have been done without any of the grander principles of Jefferson's statement with some editorial help from Franklin, among others, I'm sure. Instead, what that document did was to promise that a new nation was founded as dedicated to a new purpose. The truths that we hold to be self-evident are the promise to which our nation was from the very first of its charter documents dedicated. Absolute rights would be something completely foreign to indigenous peoples. When, for instance, the Iroquois Confederation incorporated elements of balancing of power and other egalitarian principles of the covenants, how could anyone have a right to own land? Right? From an indigenous point of view, if property is rooted in the land, there can be no real private property if the land belongs to all. If we, more literally, belong to the land, to put it in terms of one very important particular. Thus, our audacious American adventure, the marriage of nation-state government process to absolute ideals. But if it wasn't exactly a shotgun marriage, it was effected without any guarantee that the people on whom democratic power ultimately would come to rest, that the people would continue to be a people. The founders felt themselves to be a people. They shared an identity in ways that we no longer would even presume to hope And yet, in founding a nation they must have dreamed would endure for centuries, they were able to just set aside the real questions of community. And I believe they were able to do that because as white people, race was not an issue. I believe they were able to do that because as landed aristocracy or as farmers who had land, class was not an issue. I believe they were able to do that because as men, the status of women in society was not an issue, and I could go on from there. But the point is that they took for granted that a people could found a nation of the people, by the people, for the people, without taking into account who counts as a people.
Wow. Amen.
Amen.
That. You say, well, you have to understand if you're... No, I don't have to understand. They should have understood.
Right.
And Jefferson most of all. Anyway, I'll get to Jefferson a little bit. I love Jefferson. Jefferson is us, as we'll see. They somehow believed that their bold vision would continue for people like themselves.
Right.
Consider Americans' problems with Indian nations and then slavery in the slate. The Constitution assigned Indian relations to the federal government, and President Washington was intent on honoring our obligations to those nations. Also, from 1769 to 1784, Thomas Jefferson was a preeminent voice against the injustice of slavery. He well recognized that that institution contradicted America's promised ideals. When he said all men are created equal, historians say that he meant exactly that, and women too. That this was not some parsing out of language to be evasive of who counts as a people. He really was that idealist up to 1784. Jefferson was confident that America would never have the poverty of Europe because of our greatest resource. A vast frontier would afford every citizen an opportunity for land so that no one would live in peonage, no one would be homeless and landless and destitute of future prospects. No one would be a wastrel, a beggar, or in debtor's prison in this America because of our frontier. Could anyone possibly have thought of a problem with that reasoning? Anyone, maybe some genius transported from some future time would have thought, whose land is that? So here's what happened. Washington, as a president, intent on honoring the treaties with those nations, on protecting them, and in fact, on allowing those Indian nations to enforce their rights against anyone who infringed on them, white or otherwise. It turned out that the land was an important enough magnet for settlers that they overran it in ways that could never happen, for instance, in the West Bank today.
Oh, you know, that would never happen.
But when the settlers overran Indian Nation land, the state government sided with the settlers. Those settlers dictated what Washington had neither budget nor army to counteract. So he grimly acknowledged that there was nothing he could do. And really, the president who would set our policy and those issues for the remainder of the existence of such peoples would be Andrew Jackson, to very different ends. I don't sound angry about that, I hope, because I wouldn't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable here in the state of Florida, particularly. I live in Jacksonville.
That's my book.
That brings us to today. We don't need all the history in between to get to where we are. Jefferson, the idealist, continued owning slaves. And after 1784, he realized that his financial security depended on those slaves. Without the wealth of the slaves he had inherited from his wife's family, the land value of Monticello was negligible, and he would be in a position of net debt. He became silent about that for the most part. But Jefferson had a genius for living in contradiction, a real genius, a psychological masterpiece of contradiction. And our America has inherited Jefferson's talent for that. America is Jefferson. His contradictions are ours. His are the ideals of Trump and also of Harris, of Black Lives Matter and MAGA, and I would add, the city on a hill and frontier justice. So where does that leave us? I have contended for some time that only egalitarian democracy is ultimately sustainable as a form of government. I now wake to Franklin's bon mot when he was asked after, or as they were wrapping up the convention, what kind of government have you created? His response was, a republic, if you can keep it. If you can keep it. I deeply believe that American democracy can only be sustained by people's investment in what commentators call creedal America. Not the America of I was born here, not the America of I'm a majoritarian member of a religion, but the America of those very principles in the Declaration of Independence, so beautifully stated there. The idea that America is a commitment and a promise to those ideals. And that when we are patriotic, when we are truly American, it's those ideals and our commitments to those ideals that bond us together as a people, regardless of cultural communities from which we might have derived. Only that sense of America makes sense to me. Anything else is just, well, pick your own words for it. And that's exactly what has been slipping away from those like me who find it indispensable. Voters have been more moved by culture wars, by identities, and I believe most of all, by anti-identities. Why are those people having to do that? Unresolved issues from the 1960s have seen a speeded up social change. With social media in particular and news outlets really changing how we process information. As a result of that, people, voters, non-voters, just plain people, feel more out of control than ever. As one commentator put it, the secret to understanding the results of the election were the sentiment widespread, the world is getting worse. The center does not hold, as Yeats put it. We're less able to understand what's happening. We have great anxiety. We have fear for the future, fear for the loss of past tradition. Hence, the great again dream. America has let the rest of the world in. What's become of us? Just think. So, because the people of we the people are, I believe, in a state of deep existential anxiety, fear, trepidation about all these things, we're more easily influenced, and we have no brakes on those influences. Add to that the other side of the equation. Who's doing the influencing? With social media, with the news outlets, with the rise of artificial intelligence, with the demise of a shared sense of truth and shared standards of truth and of evidence, I might add, including judicial evidence, I might add, with the demise of trust, the technologies of influence are almost unbounded. The powerful can influence the people more than ever before at a time when the people are most subject in our confusion to such influence. Thus, we have whatever happened 4 months or so ago that I still am traumatized enough to not quite have a memory of. When we look in that light at the cultural changes and the bylaws changed that our Unitarian Universalism has been undergoing.
Oh, do you want me to show?
You know what? Put the mission statement up.
Oh, that's going to be hard to find.
Oh, well then put the love one up.
Here's the, this is the old
All right, leave that up for a little bit and then switch it over to the next one whenever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever it seems right.
Yep.
Our bylaws set forth principles which we maintained were not creeds. I never quite got that, actually, but I think the idea was that creeds are something religions have, and we're not really a religion, so ours aren't creeds. In any case, when my ex-wife brought a bulletin home from a UU church that had that printed on the back, I was like, well, duh, they seemed like self-evident truths to me, right? The seventh principle fell a little differently on the UU governance and on the UU population. Almost everything in those first six principles culminates in basically a humanist affirmation of principles that will stand on a rational ground without having to differentiate who they're for, where they come from, or anything else. The seventh principle, while we can state it as the Earth's lifeblood, there would have been a way to state that as a principle that, from a humanist point of view, from a European age of reason point of view, could have looked straightforward principle. But the notion of the interdependent web was intentionally open to spirituality that went beyond humans. It's beyond humanism because my relationships are to an intrinsic value that doesn't have a human pulse. And one of the factors that associates with that, I believe, was the rise of pagans, Wiccans, earth-centered religious traditions in the way that Unitarian Universalists worship. So those influences were already something at odds with a kind of classic Boston Unitarian humanist rationalism. Continue then the UU shift towards spirituality, as we did with Bill Sinkford and beyond the change of the chalice, things like that. It seemed that there were fewer societies and a few more churches that carried the UU banner. Still, we never lost our long-standing commitment to social justice as action. Still, welcoming congregations have offered sanctuary to those whose gender or romantic attractions have often made them especially unwelcome in traditional churches. The rise of Black Lives Matter brought out new flags in front of our congregations, but it also brought about a real soul-searching in our institutional leadership that's gone over a period of many years. And it mirrors in some respects what the Founding Fathers never quite got. Who are we?
No, Mark.
My second language is Italian, but only with my hands. So that the we, the community side of what we might be, is not defined by principles, but by the question of voices and ears and actions shaped by those things. This has not been an easy transition for everyone.
Do you want the new?
Yeah, flip it over. That's a great thought.
Here we go.
Others can speak far better than I to what that process has involved. Others in this room, many of you. But many of us know folks who objected to these changes, both to the change in our UU culture heading in a different direction, and to our revised bylaws. I know folks who left the church, left the denomination over the changes that ensued from taking much more seriously the consciousness involved in Black Lives Matter when we hit the streets. I have this observation. Often, the arguments I heard for resisting these changes amounted to little more than saying all lives matter. Right? True, there was legitimate concern about the possibility that approaches like white fragility might actually have the effect of increasing rather than reducing resentment. As for the bylaws change, there are different ways to interpret this statement. There's nothing wrong with our principles. It might be an argument for tradition or for the status quo. It might just be a reflex of habit. When I study the new language, I find 5.5 of the 7 principles we had before. Stated pretty darn clearly. What I don't find stated clearly can be a clue to what upsets some folks. You'll still find the second half of our old 5th principle, the use of the democratic process. But where has the right of conscience gone? Conscience was always a complex and nuanced phenomenon because a person's individual conscience is supposed to be absolute, but it's also supposed that through some providential arrangement of our ethical intentions, true conscience will agree when we all see clear of all the things that clutter our vision of things. So conscience is presumed to be universal in a kind of way that doesn't exactly fit the alignment, and yet conscience was something that one individual could stand up and say, this justifies me as an individual in this way. You will not find a statement that clear of conscience. And our 6th principle, do we no longer covenant to affirm and support the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all? Do we no longer covenant to promote world community? The new language that stems from the center of love is of inseparable, entangled values. Values that are like the quantum soup with love at the heart of it. It's process, it's relationship, it's interrelational, it's community. There's not a foundation in the individual conscience. There's not a clear statement of a goal for world community. What you will find instead of world community is beloved communities. in our plural, in our down-to-earth, multiply identified communities of intentional growth and of justice. The language of these values now, I believe, is not the language of principles. And I believe at bottom, maybe that's what's so troubling to some people, especially of humanist inclination, who see the whole culture being changed around them into something that they're less comfortable with, less familiar with. Let's start at the center. Let's start with love. Always a good place to start. Nice work if you can get it. Who wrote that? Even if love is all you need, as some idealists have argued, love is not a principle. Principles, whether of ethics or of mathematics, are derived and justified by reason. The great philosopher Immanuel Kant put it perfectly. Respect can be commanded as an obligation. Love cannot. It can in a religious sense, but not in a philosophical, rational sense. You cannot command, love your neighbor. This new Unitarian Universalist venturing forth sets a goal of beloved communities in the plural, and that might reflect our new language that transformation is never complete and never perfect. We're embracing that process. Thus, the clearly stated goal is replaced by an uncertain process of overlapping relationships where community becomes everything. Not even my conscience can stand as an independent justification anymore. I like to say we've gone from Tom Paine to Ta-Nehisi Coates. I believe what upsets folks is that we are resetting our institutional compass from principles to community, tangible community, lived community, shared community, yes, fractious and fraught, but alive. The problem with principles is that only the people, the real, living, breathing compatriots of ours, can bring principles alive. I have lived under the fairy tale of Johnny Tremaine and Thomas Jefferson, of Abraham Lincoln and Barack Obama. I have believed that the principles have a power greater than our mortal powers. I have believed that the arc of time bends toward justice as if justice were some kind of Superman bending steel. I have believed that the truths of our Declaration's opening are self-evident, that anyone can see that when their blinders fall away. So, I have believed that my world has never been what it's supposed to be, yet also have continued to believe that it can be a lot more like what it's supposed to be in light of those self-evident truths. That is to say, I still believe that we must lend our shoulders to that arc of justice, real or imagined. I still believe in hope. But I can no longer tell you that you ought to have faith in justice, that you ought to rely on that or take it as any kind of guarantee. I agree, as Sartre said, as Martin Luther King argued in his own way about the unfolding of justice and the role of time. It's what we do with time that makes things happen. And there are no guarantees in that. There's no guarantee that you should have faith in justice, in democracy, in we the people, or any other harbinger of a happy ending. So I begin from hope. Again, a much humbler thing. I believe we're planting our Unitarian Universalist hope where our hearts have always been, with the people that are not welcome in the larger United States of America, with those who are oppressed, silenced. I could go on. I would say the whole lyric to Bob Dylan's Chimes of Freedom, and for every hung-up person in the whole wide universe. That, for me, is what our shift is about. We're no longer going to say, I'm presuming these principles and they have these logical foundations and everything. No, we're going to dive into community. We're going to do what we've always done on that wave of change that we've always been such a part of. Only now, we're going to recognize that the people for whose benefit, in many cases, this change is happening, are the people whose voices are going to be guiding us. And that is transformative. Thank you.